Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today, I want to tell you a story that will make you question how far a person can be pushed before they finally say, enough. It's a story about a woman named Amanda. A woman who spent her entire life cooking, cleaning, and caring for her family, only to be treated like she was invisible. A woman who gave up her dreams, her career, and even her identity, just to be called the maid. But what happens when the one person everyone thought would always stay decides to walk away? What happens when a mother, a wife, a so-called housemaid becomes the storm that turns their perfect little world upside down? Stay with me, because what started as heartbreak turned into one of the most powerful acts of revenge you've ever heard. This is the story of Revenge Amanda, the maid they took for granted. Let's begin. Amanda Dawson had spent over 60 years of her life living for other people. She wasn't a woman who chased after dreams or accolades. No, Amanda's dream had always been simple: to have a family, to love them, and to be loved in return. She married young, gave up her career, and devoted every second of her life to her husband Frank and their only son Jason. For decades, she scrubbed floors, cooked meals, managed the household like an unpaid servant, and never once complained. She believed that one day they would see her. One day, they would appreciate everything she had given up for them. That day never came. The day her daughter-in-law Amber gave birth to Amanda's first grandson should have been the proudest moment of her life. But Amanda wasn't even told. No one called. No one sent her a message. She found out by accident, from a neighbor who casually mentioned that Jason and Amber were at the hospital. That's how little she mattered. Amanda rushed to the hospital without thinking twice. She didn't expect a grand welcome or flowers. She only wanted to see her grandson, to be there for her son and his wife. She sat quietly outside the hospital room, waiting like an outsider, unnoticed, unwanted. She stayed there for 24 hours straight. No one stepped outside to check on her. No one offered her a word of kindness. The nurses walked past her, doctors brushed by her, and through the little window on the hospital door, she watched her family gathered inside. Her husband Frank, her son Jason, and Amber, all smiling, laughing, celebrating a new life. Amanda sat outside that door like she was nothing more than a stranger. Around midnight, Amanda quietly peeked into the room. She wasn't trying to disturb anyone. She just wanted to check if the baby needed a diaper change. That's when Amber looked up, her face twisting into a sneer. She didn't smile, didn't say thank you. Instead, she asked, "Did you even wash your hands?" Amanda froze. That one question hit her like a slap. As if she were dirty. As if she were some street cleaner who didn't belong in their perfect, sterile world. Her eyes shifted to Frank and Jason, hoping, begging for them to speak up, to say something, to defend her. But both men stood there like statues. Silent, cold. Their eyes said everything. "You don't belong here." Amanda swallowed her pride and stepped back. But the final blow came moments later, when she brought a small bowl of soup she had stayed up all night preparing, hoping Amber would have something warm to eat after labor. Amber didn't even look at it. She pushed the bowl away and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "I don't eat food made by a cleaner." Cleaner. Amanda's heart shattered into 1,000 pieces. She stood there holding that bowl, her hands trembling, her throat tight. Frank didn't say a word. Jason turned away like he hadn't heard anything. In that moment, Amanda realized something devastating. In this family, the family she had built with her own hands, the family she had poured every ounce of love, time, and energy into, she was nothing more than a maid, cook, shadow. It wasn't just Amber who looked down on her. It was her own husband and son who allowed it, who stood by without a word, who had, somewhere along the way, stopped seeing her as a mother, as a wife, as a person. As she walked back to that cold hospital hallway, Amanda felt something inside her break. She had spent a lifetime sacrificing herself for these people, and now she stood outside the door, invisible to them all. That night, Amanda sat alone, her heart heavy, her eyes empty, realizing the bitter truth. She had become nothing more than a background character in her own life. Amanda didn't sleep that night. She lay wide awake in the cold darkness, staring at the ceiling, her mind racing through every memory. Every moment she had spent caring for the very people who now treated her like a disposable servant. She kept hearing Amber's voice over and over again, that sharp, cutting insult. "I don't eat food made by a cleaner." But it wasn't just Amber's words that haunted her. It was the silence. The deafening silence of her husband and her son, the two people she had sacrificed her entire life for, standing there and saying nothing. That silence screamed louder than any insult. By the time the first light of morning crept through the curtains, Amanda knew something inside her had changed forever. A part of her, maybe the last part still holding on, had finally snapped. Without a word, she got out of bed, packed a small suitcase, and for the first time in over 30 years, she made a decision for herself. Not for Frank, not for Jason, not for the family. For Amanda. She booked a flight leaving in 5 days. No destination in mind, just anywhere but here. Somewhere far away where she could finally breathe. That morning, when Jason called to bark orders at her like he always did, asking her to bring food to the hospital for Amber and Cynthia, she didn't answer. When Frank texted her, demanding she prepare dinner for the family because Amber needs proper nutrition, she read the message and quietly turned off her phone. When they realized she wasn't coming, the calls became relentless. Jason left voicemail after voicemail, growing more furious each time. "Mom, are you out of your mind? Amber just gave birth. She needs you. Mom, how can you be so selfish? You're abandoning us at the worst possible time." Amanda listened to every message without saying a word. It was almost amusing to her now, how they only noticed her absence when they needed something from her. Not once in all these years had they stopped to ask how she felt, whether she was tired, whether she was happy. She had only existed to serve them. A maid in her own home. When Frank finally showed up at the house, slamming the door behind him, his face dark with anger, Amanda was sitting in the living room, sipping tea like nothing was wrong. "What the hell are you doing, Amanda?" Frank barked. "You're running away when our family needs you the most. Amber just had a baby. Jason is counting on you." Amanda looked at him calmly, her voice colder than he had ever heard it. "No, Frank. You and Jason aren't counting on me. You're counting on the maid. The cook. The invisible woman who's been holding this family together while you all pretend she doesn't exist." Jason arrived minutes later, storming into the house. "Mom, have you completely lost your mind? What kind of mother abandons her family like this?" Amanda smiled bitterly. The kind of mother who spent her entire life being ignored, unappreciated, and disrespected. The kind of woman who finally realized she's been living like a ghost. They argued, shouted, called her selfish, dramatic, ungrateful. Amanda let them say whatever they wanted because, for the first time, she didn't care. When they left, slamming the door behind them, she picked up her phone and blocked both of their numbers. No more calls. No more messages. That night, Amanda sat in the quiet of her empty home, staring at her packed suitcase by the door. She felt something she hadn't felt in decades. The next morning, as the sun rose over the neighborhood she had lived in for most of her life, Amanda walked out of her house, locked the door behind her, and didn't look back. Her journey wasn't about running away. It was about finally running toward herself. For the first time in her life, Amanda woke up without an alarm, without anyone barking orders at her, without the weight of expectation crushing her chest. The house was quiet, peaceful. She stood by the window, watching the early morning light spill across the empty street. And for a long moment she just breathed. That morning she laced up her old sneakers, ones she hadn't touched in years, and went for a jog around the neighborhood. The air felt different, almost sweeter, without the burden she had carried for decades. Some of the neighbors waved at her, surprised to see her outside. Amanda smiled back politely, knowing what they were thinking. She used to be the woman who never stepped outside before making breakfast for Frank and Jason. The woman who spent every morning in the kitchen, every afternoon cleaning, every evening cooking. No one had ever seen her like this before, free. After her run, she made herself breakfast. Just for herself. A simple plate of eggs and toast, a hot cup of tea, enjoyed in the quiet of her own garden. No one to serve. No one to please. She picked up a book she had bought years ago but never had time to read and sat under the morning sun. For the first time in as long as she could remember, Amanda felt something she hadn't felt in decades: lightness. But the world she had left behind wasn't ready to let her go. Later that day, as she casually scrolled through social media, a post from Amber appeared on her feed. It was a photo of Frank in the kitchen, wearing an apron, smiling like he had been born to cook. Next to him was Cynthia, Amber's mother, holding a plate of freshly made pasta, beaming at the camera. The caption read, "When your father-in-law turns out to be a master chef." The comments were overflowing. Friends, family, strangers all praising Frank. "Such a caring husband and father. You're so lucky, Amber. What a man." Amanda stared at the screen, her lips curling into a bitter smile. She typed a simple comment beneath the post. "Married for 30 years and I never knew my husband could cook. What a surprise." The comment exploded. People noticed. Some laughed nervously. Others responded with awkward emojis. But Amanda didn't care. For once, she spoke the truth. It didn't take long. That evening, Frank stormed into her house without knocking. His face red, jaw clenched, breathing hard. Amanda sat calmly at the kitchen table, sipping tea. "What the hell are you trying to do, Amanda?" he barked, slamming his fist on the table hard enough to rattle her cup. She looked up at him, her face unreadable. "I'm just stating facts." Frank's voice rose. "You're making me look like a fool in front of everyone. Amber's recovering. Cynthia's been supporting her. And you've run away to play the victim." Amanda leaned back in her chair, her voice cool and steady. "No, Frank. I've spent 30 years playing the fool. You only started cooking when I stopped." He scoffed, pacing the room like a caged animal. "You're acting crazy. Cynthia can't stand kitchen smells, so I stepped up. What's so wrong about that?" Amanda's eyes darkened. "Funny. You never stepped up for me." Frank slammed his palm on the table again, this time knocking over her tea. "You need to stop this nonsense and come back home. Amber needs you." Amanda stood, her voice sharp as glass. "No, Frank. You don't need me. You need a maid. Cook. Someone to clean up after your messes while you play the hero." For a moment, Frank looked like he wanted to say something. Maybe shout, maybe beg, but he didn't. Instead, he turned on his heel and stormed out, slamming the door behind him. Amanda stood there in the quiet, looking at the spilled tea spreading across the table. And in that silence she smiled. Because for the first time in her life, she realized the truth. They had never loved her. They had only ever needed her. And now, they couldn't control her anymore. Freedom tasted sweet. But Amanda soon learned that men like Frank didn't let go so easily. He wasn't used to being left. He wasn't used to losing control. Started subtly. Amanda had decided, for the first time in her life, to buy something for herself. A brand new car. She'd spent the last 30 years driving old, practical vehicles, always putting the family's needs above her own. Now, with her own money, she wanted something beautiful, something just for her. She walked into the dealership, chose a sleek silver sedan, and when she handed over her card to make the payment, the sales associate's polite smile faltered. "I'm sorry, ma'am. Your account has been frozen." Amanda felt her stomach drop. Before she could even process what was happening, her phone rang. It was Frank. His voice oozed smug satisfaction. "You really thought you could just walk away, Amanda? Let me show you what life after divorce really feels like." For a moment she didn't speak. She just listened to the man she had spent 3 decades of her life with. The man who, without hesitation, would use money as a weapon to drag her back. But Amanda wasn't the woman she used to be. The moment she hung up, she called her best friend, Susan. The one person who had always seen her. The one person who had been waiting 4 years for Amanda to finally wake up. "Susan," Amanda said, her voice steady. "I need a lawyer. The best." Susan didn't ask questions. She simply replied, "I've been waiting for this call." By that evening, Amanda was sitting in the office of a renowned divorce attorney, laying out 30 years of sacrifice, silence, and betrayal. She wasn't going to beg Frank for her money back. She was going to fight for everything she was owed. But the more Amanda fought, the more the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. Late one night, while reviewing old financial documents with her attorney, Amanda stumbled upon something she hadn't expected. Payments. Private account transfers. All connected to one name, Cynthia. Her heart raced as the truth unraveled. The whispers she had ignored over the years, the gossip about Frank's special friendship with Cynthia, suddenly made sense. The way Frank had bent over backward to please Cynthia, how he had defended her at every turn, how he had arranged for Jason to marry Amber so that Cynthia could be part of the family. It hadn't been about family at all. It had been about keeping Cynthia close. Amanda sat there, numb, realizing that her marriage had been a lie for far longer than she had admitted to herself. The man she had stood by through bankruptcy, through sickness, through every hardship, had not only taken her for granted but had built an entire secret life behind her back. When her attorney asked if she wanted to proceed with the divorce, Amanda didn't hesitate. "Yes," she said firmly. "And I want everything he owes me." For the first time in her life, Amanda wasn't going to clean up after anyone. She wasn't going to cry behind closed doors. She was going to fight. And this time she was fighting for herself. The day Amanda filed for divorce, the sky felt unusually clear. She walked out of the courthouse with the official papers in her hand and, for the first time in decades, her back was straight, her shoulders light. She had spent 30 years giving everything she had, her youth, her energy, her entire self, to Frank and their family. Now she was finally taking something back, her freedom. Her demands were clear. A fair division of assets. Recognition for every invisible sacrifice she had made. For every meal cooked, every night spent nursing a sick child, every year spent cleaning up the messes of men who had never once thanked her. Amanda wasn't asking for a favor. She was demanding what she deserved. The news hit Frank like a bomb. He called. He shouted. He sent angry, venomous messages accusing her of betrayal, of destroying the family. When Amanda didn't answer, he dragged Jason into the chaos. Together, father and son did what cowards always do when they realize their control is slipping. They ran to the one person they thought could guilt Amanda into submission: Frank's mother. Within days, Amanda received an unexpected visitor. Frank's elderly mother appeared at her door, hunched and frail, clutching her walking stick like a weapon. "My son tells me you've lost your mind," the old woman snapped. "After all these years, you're really going to throw everything away? What will people say? A wife divorcing her husband at your age. You're embarrassing the family." Amanda listened in silence, letting the words fall like stones at her feet. There was a time when those words would have broken her, when she would have bowed her head and quietly returned home, apologizing for causing trouble. But that Amanda was gone. She looked the old woman in the eye and spoke, her voice calm but sharp as a blade. "I am not your maid. I am not your wife anymore. I am not anyone's servant." The older woman's face twisted in shock, but Amanda didn't flinch. For the first time in her life, she wasn't begging for anyone's approval. That same day, Amanda packed the last of her belongings and left Frank's sprawling mansion behind. She didn't look back. Instead, she drove to a small, modest house on the other side of town, the home her parents had left her years ago. A place she hadn't stepped foot in since her wedding day. It wasn't grand. It wasn't luxurious. But it was hers. Every corner of that house felt like a breath of fresh air. No one barking orders. No one treating her like she didn't exist. Just Amanda, the woman she had long forgotten, finally standing in her own space. The first night she slept there, she didn't cry. She didn't lie awake wondering if she had made a mistake. She slept deeply, without fear, without guilt. The next morning, Amanda opened the windows wide, letting the sunlight flood in. She brewed a fresh pot of coffee, sat by the small kitchen window, and smiled to herself. Her old life, the one where she was invisible, where she existed only to serve, was over. And now, a new one was just beginning. Before we continue, I want to pause for a moment and ask you something. If you were Amanda, after giving up your youth, your freedom, your entire life for a family that never appreciated you, what would you have done? Would you have stayed and kept sacrificing? Or would you have walked away like Amanda finally did? Tell me in the comments below. I really want to know how you feel about this story so far. Is Amanda being too harsh? Or is she finally standing up for herself after decades of silence? Alright, now let's get back to the story because things are about to get even more intense. It didn't take long for cracks to appear in the perfect little world Amanda had left behind. At first, Frank and Jason tried to pretend they didn't need her. They told everyone Amanda was just taking a break, that she would come back once she cooled off. But as days turned into weeks, reality hit them harder than they expected. Without Amanda, the Dawson household descended into chaos. Frank, who had always come home to a clean house and a hot meal, now found himself living in a mess. The laundry piled up. The kitchen was a disaster. His elderly mother, who Amanda had quietly cared for every day for the past 10 years, became his full-time responsibility. He hadn't realized how much effort it took to keep her clean, comfortable, and fed until now. Jason wasn't any better. Amber was struggling with postpartum recovery. The baby cried non-stop. And Cynthia, Amber's mother, the woman Frank and Jason had always held above Amanda, was no help at all. At first, Cynthia played the doting grandmother, showing up every day at Jason's house, offering advice, criticizing the hired nannies. But it quickly became clear that Cynthia wasn't there to help. She was there to be served. She expected her meals prepared, her laundry folded, her tea exactly the way she liked it. She demanded Jason hire more staff to keep the house in order. Amber, caught in the middle, grew increasingly frustrated. She and Cynthia bickered constantly over everything. How to care for the baby, how to manage the house, even what to eat for dinner. Their mother-daughter bond turned brittle and tense. Amber was exhausted, angry, and slowly realizing that the woman she once praised as the perfect mother was nothing like Amanda. The hired housekeepers came and went. None of them lasted longer than a week. Some quit after being yelled at by Cynthia. Others left because Jason and Frank kept piling more and more duties on them. Duties Amanda had once done alone, without complaint. One evening, after yet another argument between Amber and Cynthia exploded in the living room, Jason sat down on the sofa, his head in his hands. The baby was crying upstairs. Amber was locked in the bedroom, refusing to speak to anyone. And Cynthia had stormed out, claiming she was being disrespected. Frank sat across from Jason, staring at the mess around them. For the first time he looked tired, defeated. "This house is falling apart," Frank muttered. Jason nodded, his voice hollow. "I didn't realize how much she did." They both knew who he meant. Amanda. They had spent years treating her like she was nothing, like her efforts were expected and invisible. Now that she was gone, they were drowning in the life she used to hold together single-handedly. Frank's once perfectly organized world had turned upside down. Meals were missed. The house was always messy. His mother's care became a daily battle. And every time he glanced at the empty chair at the dinner table, the absence of Amanda felt like a gaping hole he couldn't fill. For the first time in his life, Frank understood that Amanda hadn't just kept the house running. She had kept the family from falling apart. And now, without her, they were learning the hard way how fragile their perfect world truly was. While the Dawson household spiraled into chaos without her, Amanda was learning what it felt like to finally live. For the first time in over 30 years, she had no schedule, no chores, no one demanding her attention. She had filed the divorce papers, walked away from a life of servitude, and now she was free to ask herself a question she hadn't dared to consider in decades. What did she want? Amanda packed her bags and left the city behind. She flew to Maine, to the quiet coastal town she had once dreamed of visiting in her 20s. She walked barefoot along the shoreline, letting the cold Atlantic waves kiss her toes. She watched the sunrise over the water every morning, sipping coffee from a small cafe on the pier, smiling at strangers without worrying what anyone expected of her. Next, she traveled to Montana. The endless plains stretched before her like a painting. Rolling hills, golden grass swaying under the breeze, wild horses grazing in the distance. She rented a small cabin near a ranch and spent her days horseback riding, breathing in the crisp autumn air, and gazing at the stars at night, unbothered by anyone's demands. It was the kind of life she had once imagined when she was young, before she became a wife, a mother, a woman trapped inside four walls. But her journey wasn't just about the places. It was about reconnecting with the people she had pushed aside while sacrificing everything for Frank and Jason. Her brother, Mike, hadn't seen her truly smile in years. When she called him and said she wanted to visit, he dropped everything. Amanda spent days with him and their elderly parents, who welcomed her back with open arms. They laughed over old family stories, cooked meals together without anyone barking instructions, and stayed up late drinking wine and playing cards. For the first time in decades, Amanda felt like someone's daughter, someone's sister, not just a maid. And then there was Susan. Her best friend had been waiting for this moment, the day Amanda would finally start living for herself. "You've spent 30 years making everyone else's life easier," Susan said one evening over dinner. "Isn't it time you made your own dreams come true?" Amanda smiled. "I don't even know what my dreams are anymore." But Susan did. She reminded Amanda of the little art studio they used to talk about when they were young. How Amanda had always wanted to open a cozy, creative space, a place for women like her to learn, paint, craft, and most importantly, breathe. With Susan's help, that dream finally became real. They rented a small, sunlit space in town, painted the walls a warm cream color, and filled the room with plants, art supplies, books, and soft music. They called it the Haven, a place for anyone who needed to rediscover themselves. Amanda poured her heart into it. She ran workshops, helped visitors find their creativity, and watched as women from all walks of life walked through her doors looking for peace, and left with a smile. For the first time in years, Amanda wasn't exhausted. She wasn't resentful. She wasn't invisible. She was happy. As she stood one afternoon by the studio window, the sunlight pouring in, Amanda realized something profound. Her life had once been a cage dressed up like a home. But now she had built something for herself, something real. And in that moment she knew she would never go back. It didn't take long before the calls and messages started flooding in. One evening, as Amanda was closing the studio, her phone buzzed with a message from an unfamiliar number. It was Amber. The tone was nothing like before. Gone was the cold, dismissive daughter-in-law who once tossed Amanda's soup in the trash. Now her words were soft, desperate. "Helen," the message read. "I don't know how to say this, but we need you. Need you. Everything's falling apart without you." Amanda stared at the screen, expressionless. She could almost hear Amber's voice trembling behind those words, but it didn't move her. The next day Jason called. He didn't yell like he used to. He didn't scold her or bark orders. His voice was small, almost childlike. "Mom, please, can we talk?" Amanda listened in silence as he stumbled through his words, telling her how hard things had been. How Amber was exhausted, how the baby cried endlessly, how Cynthia was no longer helping but complaining about everything, how the house felt cold without her. "Mom," he pleaded, "we can't do this without you." Amanda said nothing. She let the silence stretch until Jason finally whispered, "Please come home." That same night, Frank sent a message of his own. He didn't shout or accuse. Instead, his words were calculated, manipulative. "Amanda, I've been thinking. Maybe I didn't appreciate you enough. Maybe I took too much for granted. If you're willing to come back, I'll make changes. I'll increase your allowance. I'll remodel the house however you like. You'll never have to worry again." It was almost laughable. For years, they hadn't noticed her unless she was serving them. Now that their world was collapsing, suddenly she mattered. Amanda ignored them all. Until one day, at the airport, when she was returning from a trip with her parents, she saw Jason waiting at the arrivals gate. He looked thinner, drained, Nothing like the arrogant, dismissive son she had walked away from months ago. The moment he saw her, he ran forward, tears streaming down his face. He fell to his knees right there in front of everyone. "Mom, I'm sorry," he choked. "I was wrong. I took you for granted. Please come back. We can't live without you." People stopped to watch. Whispers filled the air. Amanda stood there, her luggage in hand, looking down at the boy she had raised. A man who had only learned how to value her when she was gone. Her voice was calm but sharp enough to cut the air. "No, Jason," she said. "You don't miss me. You miss your maid." His face crumbled, but Amanda didn't flinch. She turned and walked past him without looking back. Because she had finally learned something they never had. She didn't owe them anything. And she would never return to a life where she was nothing but invisible. When Amanda walked away that day at the airport, she knew her absence would leave a hole, but even she hadn't expected how fast their so-called perfect world would unravel. Without Amanda's quiet strength holding everything together, the Dawson family spiraled deeper into chaos. Cynthia and Amber, who once stood united in their complaints and criticisms, now turned on each other like wild animals. The cracks that Amanda had seen years ago became deep, gaping wounds. They fought over everything: how to care for the baby, how the house was managed, even over Jason's attention. Amber accused Cynthia of meddling too much, of treating their home like her own personal playground. Cynthia snapped back, reminding Amber that if it weren't for her, Amber wouldn't have married into wealth in the first place. One evening, the shouting grew so loud the neighbors called security. Jason had finally reached his breaking point. After months of trying to juggle a crying baby, an exhausted wife, and an overbearing mother-in-law, he snapped. He threw them both out. "You and your mother can find somewhere else to live," he told Amber coldly. "If you can't survive without Amanda, go find her." Amber begged, cried, tried to reason with him, but Jason wouldn't hear it. He packed their things and sent them to Cynthia's cramped apartment on the other side of town. The Dawson mansion, once warm and orderly under Amanda's care, became hollow and empty. And Frank had lost even more. First, he lost Amanda, the woman who had quietly built his empire piece by piece while he stood in the spotlight. Then he lost his son's respect. Jason no longer visited. No more family dinners, no phone calls. The silence was deafening. And then the final blow came. Frank's elderly mother passed away. She had spent her last years sick and frail, and without Amanda's patient, devoted care, her condition worsened rapidly. The nurses Frank hired came and went, but none stayed. None could fill Amanda's shoes. When she died, Frank didn't even know how to grieve. He stood at the funeral surrounded by people, but not one person who truly mattered to him was there. Frank tried everything to fix what he had broken. He called Amanda. He sent her letters. He even visited her studio once, standing awkwardly by the door like a lost man. He offered her money, more than she had ever asked for during their marriage. He promised to give her the house, the cars, half of his company if that's what it took. But Amanda simply smiled, a quiet, knowing smile. "You still don't get it, Frank," she told him. "You can't buy back what you threw away." He begged. He pleaded. But every time Amanda turned him away. Because she knew now, what Frank had mistaken for love had only ever been convenience. And Amanda Dawson had finally learned how to live without them. The day Amanda signed the final divorce papers, she didn't shed a single tear. As she stepped out of the courthouse, the weight of 30 years quietly slipped off her shoulders. There were no fireworks, no grand announcement, just a still, powerful sense of peace. She had fought a war no one had seen, a war of silence, of sacrifice, of being invisible in her own home. And now she had won. The settlement was fair. More than fair, actually. Frank's lawyers had fought hard to protect his empire, but Amanda's case was airtight. She had the proof, the years, the labor, and the story that could destroy his public image if pushed too far. In the end, he folded. She walked away with her share of the estate, enough to live comfortably for the rest of her life. But to Amanda, it wasn't about the money. It was about reclaiming her worth, something no amount of wealth could buy. She invested part of that money into the Haven, the little studio she had opened with Susan. What began as a simple dream between two friends became a sanctuary not just for her, but for so many other women like her. Women who had been overlooked, undervalued, forgotten. Her parents and her brother Mike visited her every weekend, often bringing food and laughter. Amanda laughed more than she ever had in the last 30 years. She painted, taught classes, learned how to play the piano, things she never had time for when her life was reduced to cooking and cleaning for others. The woman who once spent her days scrubbing floors now spent her mornings tending to her small garden, her afternoons reading books in the sunlight, and her evenings hosting art nights at the studio. She had built a quiet, beautiful life, and it was hers alone. Meanwhile, Frank and Jason were left with the ruins of the family Amanda had held together. Frank's house felt like a hollow museum, grand but empty. No warm meals waiting for him. No one to take care of the little things. He had everything he thought he wanted, money, power, but none of the people who truly mattered. Jason's marriage with Amber never recovered. Without Amanda acting as the silent glue holding everyone together, the cracks grew deeper. Amber moved back with her mother. Jason's calls to Amanda eventually stopped, each one colder and more desperate than the last, until finally there was nothing but silence. They had both lost the only person who had ever truly cared for them, not because she abandoned them, but because they never saw her until she was gone. One warm summer evening, Amanda sat on the front porch of her small, cozy house. The sky stretched wide above her, painted in soft orange and pink hues. A light breeze rustled the leaves, carrying the scent of blooming jasmine. Beside her, Susan handed her a glass of champagne, grinning like they were celebrating something big. "Well," Susan said, raising her glass. "You did it." Amanda smiled, her eyes soft but steady. She looked out at the quiet street, the peaceful garden, the life she had built with her own hands. Then she lifted her glass and said, almost to herself, "For the first time in my life, I belong to no one but myself." And for the first time, those words felt like the sweetest freedom in the world. And that is the story of Amanda, the woman they all took for granted, until the day she finally walked away and showed them what life without her really looked like. If there's one lesson we can take from this story, it's this. Never underestimate the quiet ones. The people who sacrifice, who give without asking for anything in return. One day they will realize their worth, and when they do, it might be too late for those who never appreciated them. Thank you so much for staying with me until the end of this story. Now I want to hear from you. What did this story make you feel? Do you think Amanda made the right choice? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. There are many more powerful, emotional, and unforgettable stories coming your way. Until next time, take care of yourself and never let anyone dim your light.